Hi again and welcome to another video. I figured it's time for something a bit different after all of these recent videos about macOS Ventura. And so, for today I have an HP ProDesk 600 G1 here with me. During the video, the plan is to disassemble this machine and then to reassemble it. Not just like that, but while doing so, I will upgrade the memory, will install an SSD, upgrade the CPU and also install a GeForce GTX 1650 video card. That should turn this rather boring office PC into a machine capable of playing recent games in decent quality. When all of this is done, I will of course do some benchmarks to see how this improved the performance, and obviously we need to test game performance in practice as well. But still quite some work to do before we get there. So let us start by taking a better look at the HP ProDesk 600 G1 that I have here and its current specifications. This machine was released by HP back in 2014, and the one I have is equipped with an Intel Core i3-4130, 4GB of DDR3 and a 500GB SATA hard drive. I would say that was mid-range at best for that time. As most of the PCs in the ProDesk range, this one was also targeted to business users, and that translates in a no-nonsense look. To my ID, the design aged pretty well and it doesn't really look outdated. Especially the tower version, which I have, has something nice to it. In terms of connectivity and media, we can find 4 USB ports in front, together with audio, a slim DVD writer and of course the power button. At the back we can find the 320 watt power supply and its connector, 2x PS2, 6 more USB ports, audio, Ethernet, 2x DisplayPort, VGA and serial. Not sure how visible this is on the footage, but the specific device I have still looks as new after a quick clean. Always nice to work on a machine in such good condition. Before starting the disassembly, let's also take a look at the upgrades I have planned for this machine. The memory will be replaced by 4x4GB of DDR3, I'll install an SSD, a new CPU, cable for that SSD, and this GeForce GTX 1650. First, the CPU. So, the current i3-4130 will be replaced with an i7-4790. Comparing both of these, it's not hard to see that the new CPU should give us a nice performance boost with double the amount of cores and threads, a turbo frequency of 4 GHz and 8 MB of cache instead of 3. As I will also be replacing the current single memory DIMM with 4 DIMMs, we'll be able to take advantage of dual channel as well. Now for that NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1650. Let's open up the box and see what we got. I chose this card for a few reasons. First of all, the power supply in the PC, as is often the case for this type of machines, is limited. It's only 320 watt, which limits the choice of video cards a lot. But even if you would have a more powerful power supply, together with the CPU, the DDR3 and motherboard, I think this is a proper match, as we don't want the other components to limit the GPU as a bottleneck. And lastly, I would say that price-wise, for this PC, a GTX 1650 was a good choice. Crypto mining is not really what we plan to do, so we should be fine to open up the anti-static package. Let me remove the plastic foil which is on top as well. And here we have it, our Inno3D GeForce GTX 1650 with 4GB of GDDR6. Curious to see how this will perform. Back to the starting point, and let's open up the HP ProDesk. It looks equally clean inside as outside. We can easily see the power supply, CPU and fan, single memory DIMM, hard disk and a slim DVD writer. Let's start our disassembly by removing the hard drive first. After disconnecting it, we can just slide it out. The date code on the drive is 1 February 2014, slightly more than 9 years old. Same approach for the slim DVD writer. We can disconnect it and then slide it out. This one seems a bit older, but from a similar period. Next, I will disconnect the cables from the motherboard, starting with the SATA cables. Then power input, P4 power, power command, and power for the SATA drives. As you can see, the power for this runs through the motherboard instead of directly from the power supply. Then the case LEDs, front USB, speaker, front audio, and finally the case fan. The CPU cooler is mounted to the case through the motherboard, so let's get that one out as well first. As expected, the thermal paste has seen better days, but we'll replace that anyway during the reassembly. After a bit of cleaning, we can also get the CPU out of the socket. We're all good now to get the motherboard out of the case. First, we need to remove the screws that hold it in place. Then we can get the board out. While the case is empty, let's have a look at the power supply as well. As mentioned, it can supply up to 320 watts. There are no connectors on it to directly power drives, as everything runs through the motherboard here. Now, the last component we can remove from the motherboard is that single memory DIMM of 4 GB. Everything is clear now. Let's take a good look at this board. We can see the CPU socket, 4 DDR3 memory DIMMs, PCI Express X16 and 3xX1, power in, power out, power command and P4, CPU fan and case fan, 4 SATA ports, front USB, speaker, front LEDs, front audio and CMOS reset jumper. Everything together looks like this, and so we have here the video card, hard disk, DVD writer, SSD, CPU, extra SATA cable, 4 memory DIMMs and the motherboard. After putting back the motherboard in the case, I'll first get it fixed. Then we can put back most of the connectors back in their place. Now that this is done, let's install that upgraded CPU. We just need to open the socket and drop in the CPU in the right orientation and close the socket. a bit of much needed fresh thermal paste on it, and then we can also reinstall the cooler. While we are close, let me also put the 4 memory DIMMs. Next up is the star of the show, the GTX 1650. As preparation, we first need to remove 2 of the brackets at the back of the case, so there is room for the card. Then we can simply get it in the PCIe X16 slot and fix it back to the case. All that's left now is to install the drives. In preparation, I first need to connect the SATA cables, and then let's start by putting back the DVD writer and get it connected to power and SATA. Next up is the original hard drive. As is typical with HP, it uses these special screws which allow to just slide it in place. Although there is an extra set of screws available in the case, it does have a different thread than what I need for the SSD. So that one I will just place here at the bottom. Let's also connect power, followed by the SATA cable for each drive. And that's it. Our reassembly and upgrades should be complete. Time to close up the case and take it for a test. Apologies for the dusty screen, but at least a good sign is that we get to see the video card BIOS for the first time. We get an error that the size of memory is different from the last boot, totally as expected of course. And let's enter the BIOS setup to have a quick look to see if everything got detected correctly. In system information, we do see the new CPU and also the 16GB of memory. Storage device configuration also shows us the added SSD. Now, before we can continue, we need to get Windows installed on that SSD. I will quickly skip through this part as I have showed this many times before. And as you can see, I chose for Windows 11 despite the CPU being unsupported and lack of TPM 2.0, but out of experience, I know this will run just fine on this hardware. Once Windows is installed, I'll also install all updates, including missing drivers. And I also installed the latest NVIDIA drivers to get the most out of that GeForce GTX 1650. All preparation is done and we can start with some benchmarks. Let's first, to keep traditions, have a good look at about this PC. As expected, this shows us exactly the same info as we saw in the BIOS. Time for the first benchmark now, which is Geekbench 5. Curious to see how much influence the CPU upgrade will have on the score. $3,660 is the result, And I ran the same test before upgrading the CPU, so we can compare it. If we put these next to each other, we can see that the difference is pretty high. Upgrading that CPU resulted in double the performance, a good start for sure. Now the compute benchmark in Geekbench 5. 41,000, that's pretty good as well. If I compare this with some cards I tested earlier, I got a lot higher than I expected. Somehow I thought the result would be more in line with the 1050 Ti, not sure why, but happy to see this card is more than twice as fast. Next, the SSD, which I will test with AGA system test. 470 MB per second write and around 500 read, completely as expected for a SATA SSD. As you can see, the old hard drive does a lot worse with speeds of around 85 MB per second. The next benchmark that I will do is Cinebench R23. After about 10 minutes, we got 4 passes, resulting in a score of 4404. As this test is mainly CPU based, this is in line with what we saw in the CPU test with Geekbench. So far the results are very nice to see. Let's go for game performance now by running 3D Mark. Somehow I expected to see a higher score here, but I'm not sure how easily these can be compared. Nevertheless, it's good to see that the temperatures of both CPU and GPU look very good, and, as far as I can see, we also don't have the CPU throttling back. Good news as well. Better to check how performance on this machine really is by testing out some games. Do keep in mind that how the games looked like on the screen still was better than what I recorded with my capture card and what you get to see here. Let's start with GTA 5, an all-time favorite of me. This is how I configured the graphics. Full HD, proper anti-aliasing, everything turned on, very high detail and maximum settings where possible. And performance with this is really good. Around 70 to 80 FPS all the time. While the graphics, despite the age of this game, look really good with these near maximum settings. In difficult environments, we can briefly see a drop to around 55 FPS, but still, nothing that impacts the game experience at all. And just look and enjoy how beautiful everything looks. A true pleasure to play the game like this. The next game involves cars as well, Forza Horizon 5. Here I configured the game as follows. Pretty high settings and Full HD as resolution again.
Let's head into the storm and find the perfect location.
As a result, the graphics again look stunning. Everything is crispy clear and this game is really good at getting the maximum out of the hardware you have. Performance-wise, even with all of this beauty, you can typically see 70 to 80 frames per second, resulting in a smooth experience again.
In 400 meters, turn sharp right. Turn sharp right.
Another success, if you ask me, even though this game is fairly new. As the video is getting pretty long already, let me quickly go to the other 3 games I have here and see how they perform. Starting with Far Cry 6. This is how I have it configured. A nice sweet spot for performance versus graphical quality to my ID. As you can see, definitely playable with an FPS of around 60 to 70 and more than acceptable graphics. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077. I got the settings as follows: low to medium and full HD. We can see immediately that this game is more demanding on the hardware, but we still get an acceptable 35 to 40 FPS in most situations. And the graphical quality is not bad at all. For sure playable and guaranteed for a lot of fun. Tweaking the settings a bit could get you a higher FPS with a trade-off for graphical quality. The last game that I will test is Hitman 3, Full HD, and the following settings regarding quality. With this choice, we can get around 60 to 70 frames per second again. Not a punishment to play this game for sure, another one that runs properly.
You must know everything that goes on at the event. Care to give me the lowdown?
I'm here for the toys.
That's more or less all I have for this video. As you could see, with these upgrades, which were actually very payable, we were able to turn this lower end business PC into a machine capable of playing recent games with a proper performance and decent graphical quality. I was pleasantly surprised by the performance of the GTX 1650, and it turned out to be a really good match with the rest of the hardware as well. Temperatures were not too high even after playing for a longer time, and power consumption was very reasonable too. All in all, very happy with this result. If you made it all the way here, thanks a lot for watching. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, and for sure consider subscribing and turning on notifications if you like this sort of videos and don't want to miss the next one. Thanks again, and hope to see you back here soon.